great. I say, Daniel, just getting us into the live stream on YouTube.
Yeah, you can go
Jack
ahead
says
and you can go ahead and pick
think I have.
whoever's first.
Yeah, Jennifer, let's get started with you. How about that?
All right, perfect.
Okay. I don't know how this works exactly, but I guess I'll just talk.
Okay.
So there is a therapist who actively works to make their patients' lives worse. That was a writing prompt from the collection that you guys sent out. And in the opening scene of this story, I have a family sitting down to dinner, and they're running a little bit late. And while they're praying before the meal, the phone rings. And the teenage son gets up to go get the phone. He has to, of course, look to his mother to ask permission before he can get up. And she says, sure, go ahead. Not in dialogue, but just with looks. She's a very controlling person in the household. And the therapist calls every night. And so this is something expected. And they wait for their son. They're praying individually while he does that. And the mother is thinking about how it seems strange that every time the therapist calls, her son becomes more despondent, more depressed, worse off after speaking to the therapist instead of better. So he goes to the phone, he picks it up, and next thing you know, he's picking out a cleaver from the knife block in the kitchen. So then you're going to have about 3 different vignettes of different people's lives in this therapist's practice. And you're going to see that the therapist is not good for these patients. I haven't exactly worked that part out yet. But the way I want to end it is that someone comes in as a new patient. And so this new patient starts telling the therapist of their experiences. And the experiences that he is describing to the therapist are the exact experiences that these other patients that she's had a hand in either killing or making their lives more miserable. And so she's going to realize that this person is there to harm her, that he knows that she has done this to these other patients. And then so it's basically going to be this revenge serial killer who kills her for being evil, basically. But yeah.
All right. And this is something that I'm getting a little bit of an echo. I think that might be from you, Beth. So just maybe mute if you're not talking. No worries. So or maybe it was from Jennifer. I think it's gone now. So this is something you're working on for this contest? Because that sounds like a lot of content to put into 5,000 words.
Yes.
So I would say, first of all, that's the challenge. I'm not saying it's not doable, but obviously that's a challenge. However, yeah, I think you have a good arc going there. I think you have a good premise, a good hook. I can see where the escalation's gonna happen and things like that. And yeah, a lot of it's going to come down to execution, but I feel like the bones are really there. Did you have any comments that came up in your mind, Beth, when she was going over that? Because felt pretty fleshed out to me. Um,
I love the premise, and I agree with Daniel that it does seem like a lot of content for 5,000 words, but you could definitely pull it off. And I would read that. I love the idea of a psychiatrist actively making people worse. And that twist of like he picks up the phone and the family is unaware, but he picks up the phone and the next thing you know, he picks up a cleaver. Loved that twist. Yes. It's a yes from me.
yeah, that
Cool.
was strong. Yeah, that, like I said, my biggest fear is just if, um, especially when you're talking about the 3 illustrative vignettes and whether or not that's just maybe not it depends on how you pull that off, but that I'm a little bit concerned with that mechanically when you're talking about 5,000
Yeah.
words.
And maybe it shouldn't be 3. Maybe I should focus on one particular character, and then that person comes to get revenge at the end for that one person.
Yeah.
Usually limiting the scope will work quite well in a short story format. So, try it. And if the 3 vignettes fit in, or if they're close, cut it maybe just to 1 other or 2 other. But that tight focus on the one might be the solution that you're looking for to get it in to the 5,000 word limit.
Cool.
All right. So let's go. Is it Bryant who's next?
I think Bryant is up next. Yeah, Bryant, let's hear your pitch.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and post mine in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
Give me 1 second.
It's really hard to come up with a great plot for a short story. It can be. That's true.
Definitely.
All right.
Yes,
Since
definitely
he's
can
posting in
be.
the chat, and for the sake of the YouTubers out there and anyone watching on a replay, I'm gonna go ahead and read this. Hopefully my sound picks up there. Sorry. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is seen through the eyes of a reporter covering the tragic death of a black teenager at the hands of an Atlanta police officer, a couple of West Coast stoners, the President of the United States, and a flat earther. Okay. Interesting cast of characters. Aliens
Mhm.
touch down in the heartland of America. The event is highly publicized thanks to cell phone and various other modern day conveniences. As civil unrest spikes throughout the country, the president must determine whether the visitors are friendly or hostile, and how the existence of these higher beings should be presented to the world. A story about the best and worst of humankind, where the species fits in the grand scheme of the universe.
Pests is actually the title of the story.
Oh, okay. Pests is a raw glimpse into the heart of man, which will lead you questioning everything. Wow. Okay. So you have a lot going on here, and the idea that you have this, civil unrest, you're speaking to things going on in the current culture, and that, people often point to, well, what could bring us all together? And the idea that it's an alien force certainly makes a lot of sense because it's something on the outside, right? So the idea that if there's anything that's going to be able to kind of bring humanity together on all these different viewpoints, aliens, I can see that. Um, what I don't have here exactly is, which is something you're not telling us, and that's fine. That I mean, in terms of you can decide what you tell us, is really like kind of what the story is. This is like a premise. It's a world building, pitch, which is fine. I have an idea of your cast of characters. When you throw in a bunch of those different things, I kind of wonder, is this going to feel a little bit too Coke commercially? Like, can we all just get along like in a cheesy way? But I'm not going to do you the disservice that you don't know what you're doing. But that's just a little bit of a nervousness I get when I read something like that, especially because I don't really have a story hook as to what is going on in this story. So aliens have arrived, and therefore what? Are they like, how is this affecting these people besides the fact that, wow, there's aliens outside, right? Um,
Right.
and but you didn't tell me one way or the other. So it's a little bit hard to analyze the pitch from there because, like I said, certainly the premise, the idea that extraterrestrial life could somehow unify culture, that makes sense. That doesn't really tell me anything about the story, though, if that makes sense.
Got it.
I agree with Daniel in that I am looking for that one central conflict. I could easily see this being a full-length novel as opposed to a short story, because you do have a lot of world building in there, and there are layers and layers of complexity that you can dig into from a thematic perspective. For a short story, I'm looking for the primary central conflict. I like the name, like pests, because that has so many layers to it as well. We're our own pests. Society is full of pests, and then there are these aliens that are obviously pests. So tough. So I like the title overall. If you're going for a short story, you might be able to really narrow into one level of the theming and one primary conflict. But I could easily see this going full-length novel without any hesitation.
All right.
Yeah, in terms of
I
a short
definitely look forward
story,
to submitting it.
yeah, this is something you're trying to do in this for this contest. So yeah, I can understand why you're picking kind of these, I don't want to say broad categories, but you have these very strong differences of characters, a flat earther versus this one, whatever that. And that kind of reminds me of like, Twilight Zone episodes where you put a bunch of different characters in a scene and something happens. But like I said, the big thing that makes that work is where you have that central conflict. So, have the aliens trap them in a room? Are they trying to figure out a message? What's that central thing going on?
Got it.
Awesome.
All right, let's move on to whoever is next.
Well, Jack says, I think I have one. Jack, how confident are you feeling? Let's hear what you got.
Sure. Mine's actually kind of in the sci-fi genre as well. It's post-war between two planets, and there's a crew, a very small crew, 3-man crew, made up of a couple humans and an alien that are transporting something, and the ship that they have is actually called a breaker. And the idea I got from this was there's a type of ship that they use around Russia that breaks up ice around the ocean, so they can actually get oil tankers through to provide heating oil and things like that to people that are kind of landlocked. And so the idea that I had was there's this ship that's transporting something to this planet, and they're debating what they're actually transporting. And one of the crew thinks that it's actually weapons to restart the war. The others think that it's actually something that's a peaceful gesture. And so a lot of it's going to be an internal conflict and back and forth of arguing until it hits a boiling point towards the end of the story.
I lost you a little bit at the end there, Jack. Can you repeat just that last bit, the last couple sentences?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the very end, basically, they're kind of debating between what they're transporting. Some of the crew thinks that it might be something that's a weapon, like it's going to rekindle the war between the planets. Some of them, it's actually something peaceful that's going to be like a gesture of friendship between the two. So that it's really a conflict between this 3-man crew on what they're bringing, and should they even be doing this run, really? And then it's going to be they're all going to start fighting towards the end. So, but I don't want to give too much away.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, I like that. That's a very trackable, because you have two conflicts there, which are nice, because you have that first conflict, which is just the journey, which is this treacherous journey they're on, right? And they're having to do logistical things to make it through. But then you have the second conflict, which is the bigger one, is, well, should they even be doing this in the first place? And a mystery, which mysteries are always great, as to, or at least a debate between, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Is this a weapon? Is this a olive branch? So yeah, that's interesting, because even going beyond that, you have the question of, well, even if it is a weapon, is it a justifiable weapon? Like, so you have a lot of different perspectives that you can play with, and short stories that end up being kind of a debate about one decision can work really well, because that's an easy thing to track for the audience as to it's a central conflict, and then the audience can kind of pick a side, and then maybe throughout start to jump sides as somebody makes a stronger argument, and kind of track that. I think it can work really well. So I like the premise a lot. I like the world building, and I like the central conflict. All right, Beth, what do you think?
I loved it. I like the narrow focus. So really having the conflict occurring between the 3 crew members, I loved. As you were talking about what their conversational kind of conflict is between the 3 of them, the ramifications of those different options. Could it be something to unite or divide or destroy? I'm wondering, will you reveal what it is in the story, or will it build to that crescendo and leave your, like, I could see that going either way, and letting your readers kind of make their own decision at the end of it and not put a neat bow on it. So I feel you have a lot of options in there in terms of how you take it to an ending and what that ending is. maybe write different endings and see which one works best for the story itself. I love it.
Yeah. And that does speak to something that you can get away with in short stories that are harder to get away with in novel, because like in a short story, you're only in that world for a certain amount of time. And so to not have, you don't have that same pressure to put the bow on it, because somebody hasn't invested hours upon hours upon hours thinking about what the answer is. It's more of a quick thought. And so there's not as much of a need for that um, solution at the end, at least in my opinion. I feel like you can get away with it a lot easier, ambiguous endings in a short story. I could certainly
I
think of a
agree.
lot more successful short stories with ambiguous endings than full-length novels with ambiguous endings. All right, who's next?
Let's grab one. I think we have several out on YouTube that would like to pitch. I'm just seeing if anybody has put a pitch in the oh, here we go. Let's grab Anne
Okay.
from our YouTube viewership.
Oh, I see that. I can read that.
Yeah,
Siblings sort through debris left from their home, which burned when they were at college. What they find, love, cherish, and fight over, and the memories the items bring up propel the story. Yeah, I really like that premise where, it's almost like archaeology, like really close in, right? It's the idea that you're learning about your own history through your artifacts, and I think that's great. The only thing I would say is, and I'm not saying you don't have one, is you still would need some sort of central conflict to bring this through. So, and is there some problem that needs to be solved? Is there something they're trying to go through these artifacts to find, perhaps? Even if it's just kind of a MacGuffin to get them started, it's just a good hook to start that journey through all the artifacts. Even if ultimately you're like, well, this is a story about people that are, well, even if it is a story about people that are kind of separated and they're kind of coming together, then, that's kind of the central conflict. Can they repair their relationship, which is reflected in the wasteland of their rubble? Like, is that kind of a metaphor for their relationship, and they're kind of unpacking it together and everything? So just be clear about a central conflict, so it doesn't just feel like too much like navel gazing, if that makes sense.
There are so many opportunities when you're talking about family conflict plus natural disaster of any kind, and fire certainly qualifies for that. I agree that a central conflict is key. I love the idea that what they're finding is moving the story forward. I would want to see moving forward to what exactly, like what would that climax look like, and what is the world, who's changed as a result of that climax, or any of the conflict. So just bringing that kind of more together, rather than it may be tempting to do the individual artifacts and items that they find, but tying them together in a central conflict that really takes the story arc up and gives us a nice solid ending with significant changes in the characters after that primary conflict or climax. That's what I would like to see.
All right.
Melissa's out there on our YouTube live stream saying, shush, 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 I'm at work and I can only chat through the chat, so I've got to be careful. Melissa and anyone watching out there on YouTube, if you have a short story pitch to share with us today, feel free to put that in the chat, or there is a Zoom link that we've posted in the YouTube chat as well. Feel free to join us live if you'd like to pitch with your voice, except Melissa, I know you can't chat right now. And I hope that nothing important comes up at work, so you can hang in there with us. Fantastic. Let's grab another from our YouTube channel. Paula, a young boy obsessed with baseball, starts a rumor about the local hermit being a cannibal. While practicing baseball, he breaks a window in the cannibal's house.
I like that.
I do like that. It's so relatable. And I can see a lot of thematic kind of moral lessons that could come from this. So I love the idea. It's got that call to action pivotal point there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
Yes,
got a clear
definitely.
conflict. It got a
Clear
clear
conflict.
conflict where the person who's been making up stories about somebody ends up having to come face to face with it. But there are questions, and I'm just asking them. I don't expect them to be answers. But my questions when I hear a premise like this is, does this person know what this kid is saying? Because you have two options there, right? They can either know and have a response, or they could be completely oblivious to it. Does this boy suspect anything about this character, or is it just completely like nonsensical? Or is there something a little bit nefarious to the point that when he has to face him, he almost starts to wonder if his own stories might in fact have some bearing and some reality to them?
Exactly. That there are
There's so
so
many
many
different ways
directions to
to
take that. And so many, is it a kind of life lesson that turns out really nicely for the boy? Is it a horror story that turns out very poorly for the boy? I can see a lot of options there, so I'm excited to see how that goes.
Yeah.
Daniel, let's pop back over to you, or to our Zoom chat. Jamie has one for us.
I'm going to type mine up into the chat because I'm in a vehicle.
Oh, neither of those sound like good options. Jamie, while you're working on that, and be safe first and foremost, let's grab, is anyone else in our Zoom chat ready? I'm just scrolling through, we're getting caught up with the chat there. Let's see.
I'm not driving, hon. I'm blind.
Oh, my goodness.
It's
You're a passenger in the car. I forgot that, Jamie. Goodness. Let's do Chrissy from the UK has one that she'd like to tell us. Chrissy, if you're still with us in Zoom, go ahead and come off of mute and let us know what you would like to pitch.
Okay. I've used one of your pitches, and it was the one that says he woke up every morning somewhere else. And how I've taken it is that this guy went to a regression therapy through his past lives. And every morning wakes up in a different century, in a different life. And the idea is that he comes back, at the beginning, he comes back searching out this therapist to ask him to put him back into regression to top this past life continuous movement on. So he's jumping about in different lives. I'll mention several different lives, but I'll focus just on two to keep the simplicity. And I think I've got quite a good hook at the end. So that's that. So basically, the time travel. So, what do you think?
Yeah. I just broke our
you
video there. It's like very Inception to Daniel onto YouTube.
I
love
like that.
I think, as we've been talking with several pitchers today, it's a large concept. It has so much room to grow and really develop those individual stories as the character is waking up in the different centuries or different times, etc. If you're working on this for that short story challenge, you may pick one or two, or even just dig real deep into one versus his, I want to say, native or his original time era, and start digging into those differences and conflicts between those two rather than having multiple hops. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
Yeah, that's my same sort of thought. I'm a little bit worried about simplicity and trying to hone in on something. Although that was something that Christine was speaking about too. So you're aware. So if you keep that in the back of your mind, you know, you'll do all right. The idea of, you know, jumping about in time is such a great, you know, concept that's been done a lot of times, and it's not something I feel like I ever get bored with. I always I always enjoy it, because there's so many different takes on it, you know, about just how time and place affects your thinking and the hindsight and all of this stuff. So like, I don't know, there's so many interesting things to explore. And I've seen a million different, well, not a million different, but you know, I've seen many different conclusions as to what you get out of it. You know, be it you know, make the most of your day, or um, thinking outside of the box, or whatever it is. You know, there's just so many different kind of conclusions that people draw from those sort of stories. But no, I like it. Uh, it's a solid hook.
Definitely. Let's grab, Akshani was with us early in the chat on Zoom. So I want to give Akshani an opportunity to jump in. And then we've got a few, I know Jamie has, I think, put hers in the chat as well. So we will drop down and grab hers right after. Akshani, are you there?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I think I took my genre a bit too far. I just let it flow with the weather in South Africa, and I went with it kind of flowed into a romantically dark horror. It's a period piece in the 1900s. Starts off with an orphan who grows up, you know, in the slums of London, and she tends to consort a bit with the demons. It's at her choice, but they tend to. An assault occurs, a 7-year-old. He ends up dying at the hands of his owner, and it kind of escalates from there, where she's a bit angry. She's not interested in anything in life, and she starts to get hunted down by a murderer, a serial killer. But it kind of twists into them with each other, and that's all I've reached at this point. I'm just letting my imagination go with this, but I'm basically moving towards this horribly romantic dark genre. I don't know.
Generally, I'm a horror fan just in general. The idea of having if it's horror romance, that's a little harder to pull off than if it's just a bit of a darker or something with romance tinged in it. So because the pure concept of romance means they will get together, there will be a happy ending. Absolutely, that's part of the defining characteristic of the genre per se. And then horror is really, you know, you don't normally have a super happy ending. So take it dark and romantic, or take it horrific and maybe a little less romance happy ending, but have love interests in there. Might be difficult to mash it through, but I love your idea of just following your inspiration and letting it flow and see where the story takes you.
Thanks. Sorry about the it's a bit cracky.
Oh, no
It's
problem.
okay. No, it's okay. Yeah, I agree. Any sort of genre bending things, the challenge is ultimately you're gonna have like a predominant genre. So are you going to be kind of more horror with a little bit of romance, or are you gonna be more romance with a little bit of horror? It sounds like you're more horror with like maybe a little bit of romance, which means it's not it's not exactly romance in like the genre framework. It's more of it's horror that has love as a plot element, it sounds like. So I think that might help your framing a little bit rather than thinking of it like, oh, I need to think of it as like a romance story. It's just, in horror stories there's relationships as well, so yeah, the thing that I am trying to get at in terms of horror is kind of what is that central kind of fear you're tapping into? What is that, because horror generally is about exploiting that inner fear we have about, a certain psychological phenomenon. Like we're scared of, I don't know, crowds or, claustrophobic or things like that. So I was trying to get a sense of what kind of fears you're exploring. And I would say for a short story, I would probably keep it down to like one major one that's kind of your big one that you're talking about. So, and that's not to say that you can't do your process. Your process sounds fine, especially for a short story. Yeah, just go ahead and write and all that. And then afterwards, kind of ask yourself, like, what is this about? Like, why did I write this? Kind of do a little bit of analysis on yourself. What was I getting at? Because you'll probably be like, oh, you know what? I was kind of talking about my fear of whatever. And then you can elevate that and you can lift that up, if that makes sense. Stephen King did that with Carrie. He wrote it and he had ideas, and then he really realized, oh, okay, no, I'm really speaking to these, the fear of women when they go through puberty and all of that. That's something he didn't initially just come to mind. He wrote it out and then he went back in and he's like, okay, I'm going to draw this out a lot more. you know so if that makes sense.
No, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Daniel, should we pop back over to YouTube? There, I saw Valentina has put a pitch in the
Sure,
chat.
I can read
there.
that.
Perfect.
All right, it says the working title is What the Child Knows. Ooh, that's kind of creepy. The story starts with an episode in the life of a little girl living inside her mother's narcissistic world. The girl speaks in first person, describing the horror of being scolded by the whole family in unison for her less than excellent grade in school. In the eyes of a young child, this is a terrible scene, and all her attempts at excuses makes things worse. But the next paragraph makes it clear the story is in fact about a grown woman, married and mother herself, who cannot help looping again and again into the memories of her childhood while she still keeps contact with her narcissistic mother. The story tells how she still feels being not enough and how it prevents her from happiness and from being the best mother she wants to be. And the final chapter gives hope as the woman starts to understand how narcissism works so that she finds her way to secure emotional boundaries without giving love. All right. I can certainly relate to things like that. Not that I had abusive family. I certainly did not, but I certainly can relate to. Sorry, my internet connection I think cut out for a second. I can certainly relate to um, childhood memories where people that are imprinted, and certain things about certainly like not measuring up. It seems like I think everybody has failures of in childhood or things like that that really resonate. Um, in terms of this is another one where this is an introspective sort of story, which is great. The challenge again is whether or not there's something kind of like a central conflict, which I would say, uh, do these loops affect this protagonist in substantial way that we can track? Like, is it keeping them from achieving something? Because you're saying ultimately they're going to figure out a way to kind of snap out of it. So that's something I can track. If it's like, well, this has kept this woman from ever achieving X, right? And then eventually she overcomes it and then she achieves X, I have a little bit more to track. Versus it just being an introspection, which is certainly interesting. It's just that's a little bit better of a of a skeleton, if that makes sense. Beth?
Agree. I would want to see the true ramifications. in a very concrete way. And I think you mentioned that the trauma from the mother in the mother from her mother prevent her from being a good mother. But how exactly does that reveal itself, right? Because she could feel that she's not being a good mother because she doesn't she buys low fat cheese sticks instead of full fat cheese sticks. Also, always get the full fat ones. They taste much better. The real stakes of what it means for the mother, the grown up, would be need to be real tangible, very tangible, right? So, and dig deep for that. We're dealing with the mom's emotional trauma. So how does that emotional trauma bear out? It needs to have some very high stakes. And so I'd really dig in on that, but I love the concept overall. Daniel, shall we take, I've got 2 from Melissa in our YouTube chat. Do you want to take those?
Yeah, that's good. A main character finds a magical notebook in a library that a deceased lady starts to communicate to her in so she can help the main character locate her dead body and kill her. Ooh, I like that.
I do. The Notebook first kind of made me think about a little bit about, isn't there a notebook in Harry Potter where they can
Chamber
write to
Secrets.
each other?
Chamber Secrets.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I knew you would remember
Potter nerd.
exactly for
Potter
me,
nerd.
Daniel. Yeah. But I like the idea of finding so this dead person nobody knows they're dead, or ostensibly the body needs to be found, the murder needs to be solved. I like that. And then her second one is just a little bit below
Well,
that.
before we go to that, I just have one comment.
Oh, sure.
That is a great that's a good starting point. What that's not giving me yet is exactly a conflict for the main character. And there's an easy way to figure that out. Is there a cost? Is there a cost to this? In terms of by doing this, the main character is not able to do something they're supposed to be doing because it's a time problem? Is it that everyone thinks the main character is nuts because they're following the book? Like, you're focusing on the book character, the character from the book, but I'm assuming that's not the viewpoint of the story. Although if it is, that's kind of cool. If it's like, I'm trapped in a book and all I could do, or all I could do is give these messages out. But if that's not what it is, and I'm not saying to do that, that just sounds kind of fun. But if it's from the standpoint of the main character, I just need to know what is going on in the main character's life that's going to inhibit, interact. What does this mean to the main character besides it's a cool mystery to solve, which it is. But I just make sure you're thinking of that. All right, you can move on, Beth, or I can move on to the next one.
Do you want to grab Melissa's other one?
Yep, a goddess of the sea who is a vessel to help the disease cross over, and no one can see her unless they are dying, comes across a sailor that can see her. You're really interested in this idea of a character that's very isolated, communicating with another character, and I would say that instinct is great. So often, especially in magical stories, people focus on, I'm going to make a character that is the coolest thing ever, when really limitations are often way more interesting. And so that your impulse to limit your characters is smart. So definitely hold on to that, because that creates conflict, that creates interest, it creates stakes. Because in the other one, I'm thinking, well, what happens if somebody steals the book, or what happens if the book gets wet? And in this one, it's like only this person can see them. Well, why is that the case? And can you get other people to see them? And so it automatically just makes your mind start racing towards other things when you put limitations, especially in a magical story.
And magical stories are right in Daniel's wheelhouse. I also really like this idea. I think between the two, the first one with the character in the notebook, I too am looking for that central conflict for the main character. But if you switch the narrator to be the dead person and they can only communicate through the notebook, that might be interesting as well. And then of course we know what the conflict is. They're dead and nobody knows, and then they have to find their killer. The second one, I could see going quite more fantastical and less dark, so more fantasy driven. So gosh, I don't know, both really great ideas. Run, if you have capacity, run with both of them and see where they take you. If not, don't rely on, my preference or Daniel's preference to pick your favorite, but pick one and run with it and just really dig in on it. Both quite good in my opinion.
The idea that nobody can see them unless they're dying is so fascinating to me, because that like puts an immediate ticking clock on anybody you have a relationship with, because it's like, where's that threshold? Like, how close to death do you have to be? But if you're at all close, it means you only have a limited amount of time before that person's dead, and then you have to find somebody else that can see you that's died. So this is really interesting. And then do those people even get a chance to communicate with each other to pass on any knowledge about what they know, or do you're like starting from scratch over and over again? I don't know. I find that hook very interesting.
Yeah. So we've got about 15 minutes left in today's show. Remember, we're focusing on short stories as part of our community writing challenge special edition of Pitch It today. So if we don't have time to get to your pitch today, don't worry, we do pitch it at other times, and you're welcome to pitch that idea again, or if it's in the chat, feel free to also, post your ideas in our Facebook group or in our AutoCrit author community in Mighty Networks, our private members only community, in that discussion group around community writing challenge. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can today. So thanks for your patience.
All right. Do we want to talk about Jamie's that she put in the chat?
Yeah, let's do that.
She said, I should stipulate my short story is taken from a chapter in the first book. My main character is a little blind girl adjusting to life with her mother and her mother's new boyfriend. Her stepfather is a serial killer and he adores her. I like that juxtaposition. She is his baby girl. He finds out that her uncle had hurt her, so as a birthday present, he helps her kill him. Afterward, he gives her her first doll. Wow, that's a lot going on there, but I like it. I mean, I don't like violence, but you know what I mean. I find it I find it engaging. Yeah. That's just a lot to unpack, but that there's a lot going on, and I like you gave a lot of story hooks there. You have the fact that you have this serial killer who also really likes his stepdaughter, which is really interesting, and then you have revenge on an uncle, which is, vengeance stories are always interesting because there's a certain amount of, well, they had what's coming to them, and then there's a certain amount of, but to take
You'll
law in your own
probably
hands in such a
really
thing
like
is a
the
conflict.
sensory
So it's
detail.
very interesting. I'm sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
I said you'll probably really appreciate the sensory detail, I'm sure.
Yeah, I too love a good revenge tale, and the dynamics in that family group that's coming together or that already existed. I very much like that angle as well.
Yeah.
You did mention it's part of the first chapter of even a series that you're writing, a trilogy, I think. So
it's out of the first book of the trilogy.
Yeah, I love the hook in that. It's definitely going to be a fantastic first chapter. I think you're very much on the right path there. Think about, as you're adapting that for the short story challenge, what that might look, how that might look different to get a full story arc in that.
To be fair, it's a chapter from around closer to the end of the first book, and it's already written. I'm just kind of tweaking it to turn it into a short story.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it would be a first chapter, because I love that. the hook about the murder. You know me, Jamie, I'm like murder all the time. So well, that's terrible. And now it's on
Well,
YouTube.
honestly,
I'm a horror
too,
fan.
what is interesting is obviously the perspective, right? If you have a blind character committing a murder, then obviously that is going to read very differently and be a different perspective on it. And you're talking about sensory detail, and yeah, I am interested in that viewpoint because that is a different perspective, and I think that's really interesting.
Awesome. How about Jane from our Zoom group here? Jane, are you still with us? You have a pitch. It's your first time. If you're feeling confident and ready to share, we'd love to hear it. Give Jane a moment to unmute. Oh, I heard a sound, but I don't think it was Jane. Oh, Jane, you out there? Okay, how about Aaron? Aaron has a one-line prompt. We'd love to hear where we could take that with you, Aaron.
All right. So my prompt is basically a transgender disabled superhero who uses crutches as both for his disabilities, but also as weapons and as ways of doing different maneuvers while he's fighting crime.
Oh,
Okay.
I love that.
And then, do you have a specific like situation that this is an interesting character and like do you have that like mapped out of this, or you're just doing character work at the moment?
Right now I've just been doing character work. I do have a scene where he's like in an alley fighting a mugger, and he's using his crutches to do some flips, and he's also got like knockout gas in the crutches that he can spray at the mugger.
Yeah, now
I can show you the crutches because they're based off of my crutches that I've got here.
Yeah,
I can show you what I'm talking about.
I love that. I love that idea. I love the
talking about these. They are so cool looking.
Those are cool looking.
Every time I wear them, I feel like a superhero.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
And
it sounds like you're really it sounds like you're really going for that classical superhero vibe, the really like like really empowering, awesome character, and a lot of it is about showing their awesomeness kind of thing. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah. I also want to show a bit of his transformation from his birth identity of Jane Lewis into the person that he's going to be as he transitions into. It's basically like his origin story.
Mm-hmm.
So as he transitions, sort of thing.
I like the theme and that underlying empowering message. Definitely. For the short story challenge, fitting that into 5,000 words with super rich backstory might be challenging, but I know you're up for it. The central conflict, or what villain will our hero be defeating, is kind of, I think, the next step to think about, because he's got these amazing powers. I think that'll also help you narrow down the focus of which powers your hero will be using. We as character creators know a lot about our characters, but in a story or even in a novel, you don't have to reveal everything that you know. So it might help to draw that reader focus into one particular power, or a few of them that play an instrumental role in defeating the current villain.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say if you're going for that classic, golden age comic feel, but with a twist as to representation of the main character, what I would try to do is really like come up with the most awesome, fun action sequence sort of thing and just really go for that. And then through the villain, you can bring up some of these things, because the villains often in comic book stories are representative of certain things, attitudes, or just different things, fears people have, you know what I mean? And so through that, you can also bring out some of this backstory, or whatever the character, whatever what the history of the character, and what the character experienced to get to that point, right? You don't necessarily have to spell it out. You can kind of pull it through by just um, having the way that the character relates to a certain situation, which can trigger some of that, if that makes sense. And that will not, my worry is if you do too much of the whole backstory, you're going to lose a lot of that joy and the fun of just this is who the character is and aren't they awesome kind of thing. And I don't want you to miss out on that, because I think that's really the fun hook of what you were talking about. When you were talking to me about like crutches and they're like weapons stuff, like I was like, oh, that's really fun and exciting. And it's not like I don't realize that there's a lot of difficulty and hardship to get to that point and all of that, but like I want to see more of a celebration of the outcome than that, if that makes sense.
And that's really what I'm kind of going for too.
Okay.
And I'm actually kind of, instead of doing it as a short story, actually a comic book, because it'll be easier to visualize everything and show people the reactions instead of just trying to tell them what they are.
Right. Exactly.
Yes. And I love your mask, by the way.
It's
got a whole bunch of
very
Iron Man
fitting.
Yes, right? Daniel, we've got one in YouTube that came in between the two from Melissa, from Michael. Story about the disappearance of an old Nez Perce, I'm sorry, Nez Perce warrior. So that's an Indian tribe in the present day. Storyline takes the reader back in time to the boyhood of the sheriff who's currently searching for the Indian.
Okay.
I can imagine that as part of the story of the boyhood of the sheriff, that we're revealing some early trauma or conflict or character shaping events that lend a specific perspective to the current search.
Yeah, that to me is the importance, right? It's that it's just like why you put in a flashback, does it have does it have a major impact on the present, and not in a, well, this is the old history. It should be a little bit more of a tie than that, I would say. Otherwise, you run the risk of the audience asking, well, why didn't you just set it in the past? Or, why are we starting with this framework if the framework itself isn't majorly impacted by that exploration? So yeah, I agree with you on that. All right, let's do some rapid fire ones to finish this up. How about that? I'm going to try to see how many I can do in really quick. A young woman suffers from rheumatoid arthritis. She spirals into desperation and meets a mad scientist type who helps her harvest new joints. It's a Frankensteinish with a twisted love story. Yeah, I think the conflict of somebody who has a problem and then ends up possibly exploiting others in order to solve said problem and finds the person with questionable morality. Yeah, all those things are great. What this doesn't tell me, again, is essentially a conflict. Is there a possibility they might discovered? Is there some sort of ticking clock, something like that?
Yes. These are awesome. These are so cool looking.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's keep going. 16-year-old orphan Katie finds out she's a hybrid half fae, half elf, hidden on this world by the goddess Destiny. Yep, the secret origin, the secret lineage, that's a popular trope. It's a little bit done, so it's not that unexpected, but it's not something that I think you could never do. Just be careful, it's done a lot. 5 people are sent to space for first time using a naked teleporter, where while erecting a sphere around the deck, a member drifts off and must be saved by a teammate. So that sounds like it's a scene sort of situation with a lot of world building about some sort of specific event, and the conflict is to solve that problem of that specific event, which sounds like a great idea for a short story. I could see that working. What that didn't tell me very much of, and I know you're limited on YouTube, is what the main characters are like. You know, what's their personality. So just be careful that this isn't so plot driven about moving chess pieces around that they feel like chess pieces. You want them to feel like full-blooded characters. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can find some. Those are from YouTube. I'm gonna find some quick ones on Zoom here, because I know there's some that got posted. Dave, recently divorced, is living alone for the first time in ages. While he's struggling to adjust, his youngest daughter, Casey, appears in his apartment without explanation. Something about her behavior is off, and Dave quite can't put his finger on it, but given recent traumatic family events, he figures that she's struggling to process everything. However, that doesn't explain why Casey keeps tearing apart Dave's apartment almost as if she's looking for something, and it also doesn't explain why Dave woke up in the middle of the night to find Casey standing over him with a knife. All right. Yeah, that's a strong hook, obviously. Somebody, because you have the idea of a good explanation as to why it seems like they're acting, you know, traumatized and all of this, but then when it starts to go in the direction of you know, standing over you a knife, and that does speak to a legitimate fear we have about processing of grief or processing of things, and whether or not people might snap, and you know, and stuff that's a little bit taboo to talk about, but you can talk about it in fiction, and that's cool. I like that. Aliens have been studied by the world governments. Their rescue have just arrived. The leaders of the labs escape behind, leaving their 2 adult children behind to answer for their crimes. Interesting. I like that. The idea of, yeah, I like that idea, especially because you say that the aliens have committed crimes. It makes me wonder what those crimes even were. Apparently, they've been studied this whole time, so they're kind of under our nose, which that's interesting world building, right? They have either some way to camouflage or some way to coexist. So conspiracy stories, I love in fiction, not in reality, but in fiction I love. And the fact that their adult children are having to answer for the adults, obviously that's a great conflict, because that's getting to a lot of guilty by association, guilty by your lineage sort of things, which are all, that's always an interesting path to go down as to responsibility and reconciliation, all that fun stuff that, again, somewhat taboo to talk about often, or difficult, but fiction, we can process these things. In 1998, Dr. Moore experiments with newborn quadruplets who will be separated, given different lives, some good, some awful. It has quickly been shut down since one of them dies, but he continues it. He basically adopts one of them and abuses her, and we follow her story when she finds out she's been living a lie. That sounds like an awful lot if for 5,000 words. That first part of it, not so much. But it gets it might be a bit much for 5,000 words when you're starting to talk about this kind of unusual origin story, and then you have it moves on to like a story about abuse. So that's, yeah, that's a lot going on there. I can't quite get my finger on what it is that's talking about. Um, uh, it's England, 1943, and 2 preteen friends come home from school and yearn for the days before rationing and war. Yeah, you know, a world building scene where you have 2 characters kind of hashing it out with different perspectives. For 5,000 words, that may not be quite enough, but it just depends. What you really need, though, is some other conflict, you know, something to pull that through. But that's not a bad starting place, for certain. That's a really vivid scene. And the fun thing about that is, what happens when you talk about history is you can often kind of talk about modern times without talking about modern times, because history tends to echo. A new detective in a small town goes to the local psychologist to investigate the third apparent suicide in the town. She discovers a list of crossed out names that makes her think that the old woman is involved. So the idea of suicides that aren't actually suicides, that's an interesting murder mystery hook for certain. That's not a conflict for the main character. You do say it's a new detective in a small town. So that makes me wonder, which maybe you have in the back of your head, why did this person come to this small town? Is there some backstory there? Is they trying to prove themselves? Things like that. Once they start to get on the case, does the person figure out and they start to hunt them down? Things like that. What's a way to escalate it into a conflict for the main character besides just a mystery to be solved?
Yep.
All right, well, we could do this for a while because we have so
Yeah.
many of these, and I've been having a great time, as you can tell. I love talking story. I love doing this, and we will continue to do Pitch It. So if you are just tuning in and you have never seen a Pitch It show before, or you're not a regular subscriber to this channel, then what is your problem? No, I'm just kidding. But you should go ahead and subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube. And for those of you who are AutoCrit members, which I hope is most of you because AutoCrit is awesome, you will continue to see Pitch It in the events section of the community. And so you can go to the AutoCrit community and look for events and continue to look for Pitch It, and you can even RSVP and it'll send you reminders and all of that fun stuff. All right, so Beth, do you want to share what's coming up throughout the rest of the week with your handy dandy calendar? There it is.
My handy dandy calendar. We have some amazing guests coming up for everyone who's participating in the Community Writing Challenge. Starting tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, we have author Rain Hall, and we're going to be talking short story tips and tricks, but also Rain is going to help us understand how to use setting very effectively within your stories. If you're not familiar with Rain Hall, she is the author of the Blue Books for Writers, the Writer's Craft series, and there are 35 plus of those now. But join us tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, to join our conversation with Rain. And then on Friday, to round out the week, we're going to have a write-in. Now, we're not going to do prompts like we usually do, but we're going to have some accountability. So we'll set some timers, do some word sprints, and get some of the work under our belt, just a way to set aside some time and get some partnership and accountability with your writing during this challenge. So that's what's coming up the rest of this week. And then on Monday, we will have kind of short story power editing and switching from writing to editing tips and tricks from our friend Ali Mashadi over at the Writers Ally. So join us on all our upcoming lives. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Pitch It. It was really focused on our short story challenge, but any of the pitches that have come through, we love them all. All of the advice that's come through, if we didn't get to your pitch, think about the advice from our other pitch responses, and have your hook, have your main conflict, be ready to have a full story arc in your short story. And again, any kind of big twist ending doesn't have to be revealed here, but we love to see that in the story itself.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and thank you so much for your participation. We had such a lively audience today, which is always so much fun. And I'm seeing a lot of comments here about everybody saying they had a great time. So great, and we got those creative juices flowing, which is what we're trying to do. So we will see you around, like I said. In the meantime, do not forget to join us on AutoCrit. Join us at autocrit.com/live. Join us on YouTube. Join us somewhere. Find us. We're around. And we will see you tomorrow.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.